Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Tonight we're learning Maseches Yoma, Daf Kaf Gimel. We're on the very bottom line of Kaf Beis and Beis. And the Gemara is continuing the theme of not standing up for oneself. We learned yesterday in regards to Shaul that there were those who were mevazeh, not that, Michael, that there were those who were mevazeh him and he didn't stand up for it and it led to very bad things. And then the Gemara continues in the theme, middle of the bottom line of Kaf Beis and Beis, V'amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, a correction in the Girsa. Anyone who wants to consider themselves a Talmud Chacham, but they don't have Nekama and Netira, if they're not able to have revenge, and if they're not able to hold a grudge, then they're not a Talmud Chacham. Says the Gemara, the most obvious question ever. Lo sikom v'lo sitor. How can you say that Talmud Chacham has to have it? Dafka Talmud Chacham shouldn't have it. It's mamash a pasuk in Chumash. Says the Gemara, hahu. When the Torah speaks about the fact that it says lo sikom v'lo sitor, what is that talking about? Hahu b'mamon hu dichsiv. That is only talking about money. The Tanya, as the Brisa writes, ezehu nekama, ezohi nekima, ezohi netira. Nekima. How do we define nekima? What does it mean to take revenge? Amar lo hishilani megalcha. I ask you to lend me one of the tools in your shed. Amar lo lav, I'm not lending it to you. Lamachar, I who was not able to get from you because you were strict. Lamachar, Amar lo, who the lender says hashileni kardumach, lend me something that you have in your shed. Amar lo, any mashilcha kedach shelo yishaltani zohi nekima. That if the reason why you're not giving is you should have given to me, but the fact that you didn't give to me means I'm not going to give to you. So that is called nekama. And that is an Isser Doraisa as it relates to mammon. It's Fezo Hinatira, 7 lines down. Amar lehi shilani kardumach. So you say to someone, please lend me something. Amar le lo. And lamachar amar lehi shilani chalukcha. And the next day, that person says to you, the person who was stingy says, can I borrow your shirt? Can I borrow your jacket? Amar lo, yeah, you can borrow it, but I'm going to also stick the dagger. And Amar lo, helach, yeah, you can take it. Any kamos, I'm not like you. Shelo yishaltani zohi natira. You say, okay, I'll give to you, but you're a jerk. So that's called natira. These are the violations. So what's the assumption of the Gemara at this point? We said a Talmud Chacham has to be no came and no ter kenachash, but that should be an Isser Doraisa. And the Gemara seems to assume that that's only true by Mamonis. Asks the Gemara, really? The tzaro de gufalo? Even if it doesn't have to do with money, it only has to do with you as a person, then there's no Isser of Nekama, there's no Isser of Netira. Says the Gemara, Ve'atanya, we're 8, 9, 10 lines down on Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph. Tanya, the Brisa writes, I love in vain. When people who are insulted and don't respond with insults, shomen charpasim in mashiv, and they hear something terrible about themselves and they don't respond. Osin me'ava usmechin misern lena kasu omer v'avav tzis hashem shvigvura. So that's considered a mila to zip the lip. You have nothing to say. Just leave it alone. If that's considered a mila, so then l'chora there is nekama and there is netira as it relates to a human being, and certainly to a Talmud Chacham, it doesn't make any sense. Answers the Gemara, really you're just holding it in your heart. Asks the Gemara, what do you mean you're holding it in your heart? You can't do that either. If you're mavir amidosav, so then you get all of your averos. Wait, you cannot hold this in your heart. That's not right. You should be mavir amidosav. If he did something about you, you should try to forget about it. It's very difficult to do that, but that's what the Gemara says is the recommended model. So says the Gemara, we're not talking about remembering it in an emotional way, just in a factual way. The person who did something wrong asks for forgiveness and you grant him forgiveness. What are you remembering then? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi on the second line says, Rashi says, no, on the third line, Denaki believe. What does it mean that he holds it in his heart? He forgave the person, but if he sees that this person is getting his day on this world, he's getting a consequence that seems to be in line with what he did wrong to you, so then you don't have to say anything. You can just be quiet about it. But it's not an emotional thing, it's just a technical memory, which is very difficult to do. 1/3 of the way down at the 2000 Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph. We said that in the Mishnah, we said that when there is a tie at the top of the ramp for the Kohanim who wanted to be Zochim Trumas Adeshen, so what they did is they told all the Kohanim to put out 1 or 2 fingers. Says the Gemara, what's going on here? Once we say you're allowed to put out 2, of course you can put out 1 finger. So what are we even talking about here? We're talking about a bari, a person who's healthy. He's able to take the muscles and to close all of the fingers but 1. But there are some people who can't. It's harder for them to close all of their fingers, so they can leave out 2 fingers. That's considered a cholet. Ve'atanya, and the Meforshim point out that this ve'atanya is not a question. This ve'atanya is, as we say, binichusa. It's a proof. It's not a question. Ve'atanya, and where do we see this? Achas motzi, and person can put out should put out one finger. Shtayim ein motzin should not put out two. What is this talking about? B'med dvarim amurim, says the Brisa B'vari. However, aval b'chol afidu shtayim motzin v'ayichidim, the ones who do put out their two hands, motzin shtayim ve'ein monin l'hanei la'achas. The people who are sick and they put out two fingers, we only count it as one. It's like their hands are kind of stuck there. They're missing some motor skills. They can't retract all of their fingers, so they have two fingers out, but we only count them as one because they're chola. Says the Gemara, that doesn't make any sense. We count them only as one. Why would we count them only as one? We should be counting them as each finger should be one. Why? This is a real a strong one. Ein motzi and lo shlish. One is not allowed to extend they're not allowed to extend their third finger below godel and not their thumbs. Mivnei haramoin. We said that you're not allowed to do that. However, but if in fact one does extend their third finger, then it counts. So we see that each individual finger does count. So why are you counting the chol as two fingers as one? You should count it as two. And we said godel ein monin lo. And if a person does stick out their thumb when they're counting, it doesn't work for the kohanim to count. We ignore the thumb. Says the Gemara, not only that, we'll see what this means momentarily, that you get smacked with a whip of some kind. We'll deal with this in a moment. So that's what the Gemara's question is. The Gemara's question is, we see from here that we do count each finger individually. So you said that by the chol, if he has two fingers out, we count it as one, but we see a brisa that indicates you count each finger. Answers the Gemara, that's because you misunderstood the brisa. We're a little bit more than halfway down. My monin lo nami achas. It doesn't mean that, it means that it's also counted as part of the one. It doesn't mean that we count them separately, just another way to interpret the brisa, getting us out of this problem. My pekia, what is going on here that he gets whipped with this particular thing? My pekia, Amar Rav Madra, answering us with a word that we still don't know what it means. Asks the Gemara, my Madra, answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Papa, Mitraka detaye, it's the whip. It's some type of strap that's used as a whip of merchants, the pasik reshe, and the ends of it are frayed. So when you whip someone, it's not one point of contact, it's multiple points of contact. So imagine, for example, you have a whip that's made out of leather with 6 braids, and it opens at the end to 6 ends, and then you whip someone with that, way more painful, more points of contact. That is the type of whip we're talking about. Amar Abaye Meresh, initially, Havamina, I used to think that Haditznan ben beboy. We learned this in Shkalim, I think. Yeah, we learned this in Shkalim. Haditznan ben beboy memuna ala pakia. I mean, a psilta. When we're talking about the person who was appointed on the pakia, we had said in Maseches Shkalim that was talking about psilta, about the wicks, which were made from many fibers woven together. Keditznan, as we learned that they were made out of the old and ruined clothes of the Kohanim. Mi beloy michnese haKohanim umehen yenehen. I thought initially that when we said someone was memuna ala pakia, that it was talking about making wicks from clothing. That's what I thought was going on. But since I saw what we just learned in the Brisa quote, now I know what we're talking about. Amina, my pakia nagda. Now I know we're talking about a whip, and we're not talking about the wicks for the candle. So again, to review, what we're talking about here is when people ran up the ramp, again, before the pious was established for the Trumas Hadeshin. When it comes to Trumas Hadeshin, if there are 2 Kohanim that run up the ramp and they are, and they tie, so we ask them to put out the fingers, 1 finger or 2 finger. And if they cheat and put out their thumb, they get a lash. What do they get lashes with? With the whip. He thought that it was, initially was that the word Pekia was a reference to the wicks that were made from the clothes of old Kohanim, the old clothes of Kohanim. And he says now that I see now that that's not the case, but rather it was the whip that was used to punish people, punish Kohanim for sticking out their thumbs when they tried to chap a Ryan and to win the Trumas Hadeshin that way. That brings us to the 2 dots at the very last of the short lines on Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph, 3/4 of the way down. This is not a beautiful moment in our history. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis have taught us. There were 2 Kohanim who were racing to get the zchus of doing the Trumas Hadeshin. Could you imagine? You're running up to do the Trumas Hadeshin and you do the following avera. Guy number 1, Ruvain wins. Natal Sakin, the takalo belibo. Shimon lost, took a knife, stabbed the guy in the heart. If we were talking about Kohanim, these are chashuva people who were Talmidei Chachamim. This is not normal human being behavior. Something's really off here. This is not the way that people do things. So Amad Rabbi Tzadok al Mailas Ulam Ba'amar wasn't the Ulam Mamish of the Heichal, but it was on a set of stairs in the Mikdash. And he said, Achenu Beis Yisrael, come on everybody, Shimon, you need to listen to me. Harehu Omer, he was giving Musar. We know the pasuk in Sefer Dvarim, in Parshas Shoftim, Ki Matei Chalal Ba'adama, we know that if a person, a dead body is found on the ground, and the elders and the judges would go out, and Madadu, the pasuk finishes off that they'll measure which city. This is the din of Egla Arufa. Anu al Mila Havi Egla Arufa al Iro al Azaros. Are we talking about bringing the Egla Arufa on the city, or are we talking about it on the Azara? Namely, you just killed someone in the Azara, which was a big muster to the crowd. So what the room responded with emotion. Ga'u kol ha'am bebechia. Everybody screamed out in cries. And what was crazy is the following. This is already crazy enough. So now you have a person who was just stabbed. The father of the person who was just stabbed, says the Gemara 5 lines into the middle with lines, Ba'aviv shel tinok. Tinok here is meant as a homily. It's not a homily, it's just his child. It's meant to be a reference to his child. This Kohen who was just stabbed, Ba'aviv shel tinok umato kishehu mefarper. He saw he was still moving. He hadn't totally died yet. He was still moving. Omar, what was he say? What did he say? He said first a catchphrase, Hareu kaparasem. This should be a kapara. Ve'adayin b'ni mefarper v'lo nitma sakin. Well, look where his head was. My son is still moving around. The son who had the knife in him, and v'lo nitma sakin. Until the person actually dies, the knife that's in his chest is not tameh yet. Unbelievable. Terrible, low level, where we cared less about life itself than we did about the tumah v'tara status of a knife that was used to kill somebody. An unbelievable, again, it's so hard to grasp. Some of these people were great people, some were not, but some were great people. This is so hard to understand. V'cheinu omer, and in fact, the Brisa continues with a text proof. V'gam dam naki shafach Menashe harbe me'od al asher mileis Yerushalayim pelapeh. And Menashe killed a lot of people. Blood was everywhere. We're going to come back to this in a moment. Hey, Maisa Kadim. A little bit of a question. Which story came first? Was it the story we learned yesterday about shoving someone off the ramp and breaking his leg? Or this story as they ran up for the Trumas Hadeshin about killing someone? Which story came first? If you want to say that what came first was the killing of a person, here, in regards to shvichus damim, if after that they didn't set up the pious, then anishbara raglo takinu, you think that breaking a leg is going to be a reason why? That's crazy. Murder is much worse than this. So if murder is so bad, you should have done the pious after that. It must be that the regal must have come first. 5 lines from the bottom, it must be that the legs came first. But says the Gemara, no. The Kevan to Takinu Paisa, once you already had a scenario where the regal was broken first and then they came up with the pious, then how did this brisa happen? I don't understand. Arba Amos Maya Vidatayu. If you already had the pious, then where was this second case of the murdering? There was no more system of running up the ramps. You already put the pious in. Therefore, the Gemara flips back 4 lines from the bottom. First of the very long lines, Olam to Shvichus Damim Kadim. Really, the murder case took place first, where they both ran up the ramp. And Umei Ikara, the Chachamim looked at that scenario and said, this is episodic, this is one-off, this is not a regular thing. Mei Ikara Stavur Akroi Be'almu. It happened, but it was not something that was regular. Kevan dechazi afilu memela asuli de sakana. And since they saw another time where this guy ran up and he got pushed off and broke his leg, takinu rabbanon paisa. So that's how the Gemara explains that the 2 stories were sequential. The first was the murder, and the second was the leg breaking. Because the reason they said that is because the murder was such an unlikely scenario, that because it was such an unlikely scenario, they didn't feel the need to change the guidelines. But then they saw they shoved someone else off the kevesh and broke his leg. So then they're like, wow, we missed that. We missed it on this one. We should have put in the rules earlier. And that is what they said. The Gemara is now going to quote the line that we saw earlier, the musar that they got from Egla Arufa. It's a long quote. It's a line and a half of quoting. Amar Reb Tzadok al Mailos Ulam Amar. We said that Reb Tzadok gave musar after this episode took place in the Mikdash. Amar Achenu Beis Yisrael Shimu Harehu Omer Ki Yimazei Chalal Ba'adama Anan Al Mila Havi Al Ha'ir Al Hazar. He's giving musar from Egla Arufa. Says the Gemara, you're giving musar from Egla Arufa. It's not even shaykh by Yerushalayim. Egla Arufa doesn't apply in Yerushalayim Bechal. Last line of Chav Gimel Amar Aleph says the Gemara, Yerushalayim Basa Suye Egla Arufa Hi. The city of Yerushalayim is not subject to the rules of Egla Arufa. So if there were to be a halal, they find a corpse outside of Yerushalayim. They don't do the measuring to Yerushalayim. It's just not eligible. From where do we know this? Bottom line, middle of the line. Ve'atanya asara dvarim nemru b'Yerushalayim. There were 10 things that were stated about Yerushalayim. Ve'achas mehen eina mevia Egla Arufa. That we don't have an Egla Arufa in the city of Yerushalayim. Why? Rashi. Dibra Maskel eina mevia Egla Arufa. Rashi says, Ki matzeh chalal ba'adama vegomer l'rishta ve'in Yerushalayim Yerusha dekasara lo nischalka l'shvatim, because according to this shita in the Gemara, Yerushalayim was not nischalka l'shvatim. This is a machlokas that we saw earlier. According to one shita, the one that's more well known is that Yerushalayim was split in half between Binyamin and Yehuda, and we saw that there was a little jutting out where the Mizbeach took place, fine, everything that we learned earlier. But the point of the Gemara here is that according to this shita, they're assuming that Yerushalayim is not nischalka l'shvatim, and if that's the case, then it's not zocha l'Yerusha, and if it's not l'rishta, then it's not shaykh te'egla rufa. So the question is asked. They don't understand why. And furthermore, lo noda mihikau, the pasuk writes in Sefer Dvarim that the only time that we have a scenario of egla arufa is when we don't know who the murderer is. But everybody witnessed what happened. We know who he is. V'ha noda mihikau. We know exactly what happened. So for two very good reasons, we know why this should not be applicable to egla arufa. The murder that took place when they raced up and one guy won, Ruvain won, and Shimon stabbed Ruvain, that case is not eligible for egla arufa. So when Reb Tzadok got up on the stairs and he started screaming and kicking and telling everyone what a bad, terrible thing they did, he didn't have a halachic basis for his argument. Says the Gemara, he knows that. It's mamash pasuk and chumash. He knows that. He used something that he knew would be drawing on the people. He used an example of egla arufa that then led to a lot of tears, which is what he wanted to evoke. Another quote from the Brisa we learned, that the father of the Kohen who had been stabbed, Ruvain in our case, he saw that he was still physically moving after he was stabbed. Amar, and we said in the Gemara, that it was going to be a kapara of some kind, and then the Gemara said this crazy line, that he seemed to be more concerned about the knife in his chest than the fact that his son was killed by a knife. An unbelievable paradox of parenting. That's not normal. Your brain should not be anywhere near halacha at that point. It's one of the svaras in the Rishonim by Aninus. When a person has lost a loved one, your brain is not registering like that. That's not how things work. That's why you don't do mitzvot saseh. You can't do mitzvot lo saseh. But for that day until burial, so then that's a big problem. That day, we assume that you should be pater for mitzvot. So then here, why are you focusing on shvichus damim? So the Gemara asks as follows, I want to understand something about this line. You said that he seems to be more concerned about the tahara status of the knife that's in his son's chest than the fact that his son was killed. Is it really that they were looking with such lightness and such frivolity over murder? Aval taras kelim kedekaima kaima. He was just looking very halachically, very black and white about whether or not the kli was going to be tamei or dilma, or perhaps maybe shvichus damim kedekaima kaima. Maybe really he was looking at murder the way that he should have, aval taras kelim hu dechamura. But the only reason he said something is because it's such a chamur iser. So says the Gemara, we already saw the answer to this, quarter of the way down. Tashma midekanasi la talmuda, because the Gemara already quoted, quote, the gam damna kishafach Menashe. The pasuk said explicitly that David was killed, that Menashe was killing people. That Menashe was killing people. So if that's the case, we see that they were being very frivolous about life, that he was killing people right and left, and we said that the city was milei dam. So therefore, Shma min hashvichus damim hu dezalvataris kelim kedekaima kaima. So it's in fact true. And the assumption from the Brisa at that time was accurate, that people were being very lenient about life and very machmir about, or properly machmir about Kelim, but that should not have been his focus. It should not have been his focus. Tanu Rabbanan, we're 1/3 of the way down on Chav Gimel Amud Beis. We're going to switch gears now to a particular mitzvah called Hotza'as Hadeshen. We know about Haramas Hadeshen. The mitzvah of Trumas Hadeshen is to take ash off of the Mizbeach. The Hotza'ah is to take it from that person and then bring it out of the Mikdash to a place that it needed to go. So two different mitzvahs. We have the Harama followed by the Hotza'ah. The scooping it up in a shovel was step number one, and then taking that shovel of ash and moving it out of the Mikdash. So we're going to be discussing right now. First, we're going to discuss the Hotza'ah, the second thing, because we've already discussed the Trumas Hadeshen. Tanu Rabbanan. The pasuk reads in Chumash as follows: "Upashat v'lavash begadim acherim." We see that he changes his clothes and he puts on other clothes. V'otzias hadeshen, and only then does he do atzas hadeshen. That second step, someone's already shoveled it out. The ash is sitting in the shovel. Now the harama was done. Now they have to do hotzas hadeshen. So it says the Gemara in the name of the Tanakama. The Gemara writes, "Shome'ani kederach Yom Kippurim." This seems to be just like Yom Kippur, how he changes his clothes there. Shapochet. Big day kodesh velovesh big day chol. I might have thought that when it comes to the hotzas hadeshen, to taking the ash out of the mikdash area, that you can wear even big day chol. Says the Gemara, no, that's not true. The Tanakama argues, Talmud Lomar, that we therefore need the pasuk uvoshatis begadav lavash begadim acherim What does he learn from this pasuk? Makish begadim shelovish lebegadim sheposhet. The clothes that he's putting on have to be similar to the clothes that he is disrobing. How are they similar? Malahalan bigdei kodesh, avkan bigdei kodesh. So the Tanakhama is of the opinion in this brisa that, of course, the harama, when you're doing trumas hadeshin, it has to be done with biktusha, with clothes that are kadosh. But he even holds that it has to be behotzai because there's a hekesh in the psukim. Im Kain asks the Gemara, why does the pasuk then said v'lavash begadim acherim? What was implied by the word acherim? It was very reasonable to understand ufashat begadav v'lavash begadim acherim. If he's changing his clothes, we easily could have assumed that the word acherim was not kadosh clothes. So then, according to the Tanakhama, what does it mean acherim? Says Gemara, pchusin mehem. We're talking about clothes that are still kadosh, but they're of a lower quality. Where do we see such things? Rabbi Eliezer Omer acherim v'hotzi limit alakan and ba'alei mumen sheksher mahotzi adeshen. So the second, that was the Tanakhama. The second sheet is Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Eliezer says as follows. He says, acherim v'hotzi limit alakan and ba'alei mumen sheksher mahotzi adeshen. He said no. The Tanakhama held that you had to wear clothes that were kadosh to do the hotzah sadeshen. What does Rabbi Eliezer say? Forget about that. You could have a kohen who's a Baal Mum do the hotzah. This is not an avoda of the Beis HaMikdash. Remember, we also saw earlier in this Masechta and elsewhere, I believe in Shkalim somewhere, that that a kohen who was a Baal Mum was maslian asayit. He'd remove the worms from the wood because it wasn't an avoda. What's Rabbi Eliezer saying here? He's pushing against the Tanakhama. The Tanakhama was of the opinion that the hotzah sadeshen, the ash that was in the shovel, already taken from the harama, the ash that's in the shovel, when we take it out of the mikdash, it has to be done b'kedusha. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, even a Baal Mum can do it. Amar Mar, let's analyze this a little bit. We're going to have a few pieces of analytics. We'll get to the top of Chavdal and Amar Aleph, and then we will stop. Amar Mar, acherim pchusin mehem. We said that what does the word acherim mean according to the Tanakhama? It means that the clothes can be of lower quality, but they still have to have kedusha because the Tanakhama held that the hotzah sadeshen had to be done b'kedusha. What's an example of clothing that has kedusha but is still not ideal? The Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, begadim shebishal ben kedera l'rabo, a person who cooks your apron, you're wearing an apron, it's covered in the splatter, all the barbecue sauce, whatever you are making, you're covered in food. Lo yimzok ben kos l'rabo. You should not be using that same apron to serve your Rebbe. So if you, in the old houses, they would have people who were working in the kitchen and people who were waiters and servants. And they were different. The people who were in the kitchen, their hands were dirty, their hair was all disheveled, their clothes were filthy. It's not nice, but the clothes are still the clothes of the person, right? So that's what the Gemara says as an example of the Tanakhama. Then the Gemara decides, or has a machlokes, I should say, about the scope of this machlokes tanaim. The machlokes tanaim, as we have it right now, seems to be a machlokes about hotzah hadeshen, that second step about removing the ash, what that's already in the shovel, out of the mikdash. Machlokes between the Tanakhama, who holds that it needs to be done mikdusha, and the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer that holds that it could even be done by a Baal Mum. So says the Gemara, how far do we take this machlokes? I'll foreshadow just a drop. Do we say their machlokes is only by hotzah, only by that second step of once the ash is in the shovel and taking it out? Or would we even say that maybe the trumas hadeshen itself is subject to this machlokes, and that is a machlokes amoraim? Says the Gemara a little bit more than halfway down. Amar Reish Lakish, ke machlokes behotzah, kach machlokes beharama. What a wild shita. Reish Lakish says that yes, we have a machlokes Tanakhama and Rabbi Eliezer in regard to whether that second step of hotzah is subject to kedusha or not, and he says that the same exact machlokes applies beharama, even with that first step of shoveling from the mizbeach itself, which we thought up until now was a davar pashat, that was considered an avoda of the mikdash, and it would have to be done by a kohen who's not a Baal Mum. We'd have to wear the appropriate begadim. However, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, no, the machlokes is behotzah like we thought, which is more intuitive. The machlokes is behotzah. Aval beharama divrei akol avoda. And he says, I don't know what you're talking about, Reish Lakish. So asks the Gemara, Reish Lakish, what are you talking about? My time with the Reish Lakish. Why is Reish Lakish of the opinion the machlokes that we have by hotzah between the Tanakhama and Rabbi Eliezer is also a machlokes that's extended to the world of haram, of trumas hadeshen itself? Amar Lach, he says, Isal kadaita chavodahi. If it was a slam dunk, that the Trumas Hadeshen itself, step one of shoveling ash from the Mizbech, if that was mamash and avoda, yesh lecha avoda sheksher b'shnei kelim. So the problem is that the Torah only explicitly states that the Kohen is only going to be wearing 2 of the 4 begadim. So what is that? Where do we see an avoda in the Beis HaMikdash that you only wear 2 of the begadim? You don't. So therefore, Reish Lakish says, by virtue of the fact that the Torah only explicates 2 of the 4 begadim to do the Trumas Hadeshen, it shows you that it's not a proper avoda, and therefore it gives latitude that the machlokas of the Tanakh Rabbi Eliezer could apply even betrumas hadeshen, and not only behotzas hadeshen. How does Rabbi Yochanan answer that? The Torah does in fact say it's only two. But Rabbi Yochanan, what do you say? Says the Gemara, you're right that gali rachmana beketones umichnasayim, that it only speaks about this shirt that he was wearing and the pants. It's true, but the huadin the mitznefes ve'avneit, it's also true about the other garments of a hat and a belt. So what does Rabbi Yochanan say? I know the Torah only says it is two begadim, but it doesn't mean that. It means that there's four begadim. Why then would Rabbi Yochanan argue that? Why is it that the Torah only speaks about the ketones and about the michnasayim? Says the Gemara based on a drasha. Michnaseva, the reason why Rabbi Yochanan says, the reason why the Torah only spoke about two of the four begadim when it should have spoken about all four is because midovad. What does that pasuk mean? Mido kimidaso. This is a reference, as Rashi highlights, that we're talking about the fact that the ketones has to actually fit you. You can't walk in clothes that don't fit you, that you're swimming in, or that are too snug. They have to fit you like a mensch. That's what it means that the ketones has to fit. And michnasebad, what does that pasuk mean? Lechidatanya. What does the Brisa write about these words? How do we know that the michnasayim have to be the first garment put on by the Kohen? So Rabbi Yochanan has a beautiful explanation. He says, the only reason why these two things were explicated was because there was a need to, based on drushas, but really it is an avoda to do harama sadeshen. He needs all four garments. There's a reason why the Torah only wrote two, but really he should wear four. And there is no machlokas by the harama sadeshen. Machlokas, the Tanakh Rabbi Eliezer, is only in regards to hotzah sadeshen and not harama sadeshen. The Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish, what do you say about Rabbi Yochanan's explanation? He gave a very valid explanation as to why the Torah only stipulated two of the begadim, and really it should be four. Answers the Gemara of Reish Lakish, 10 lines from the bottom. Mido, what does it mean? Mido, kimidaso. What does it mean that it has to be the right size? Midake rachmana belashon mido. I don't need a drasha to tell me that it has to fit. The pasuk says mido. That's what the word means. Mido from your size. I don't need you to. Rabbi Yochanan wanted to argue there was a specific drasha to tell me that the clothes have to fit you, the ketones has to fit. No, says Rabbi Reish Lakish. The pasuk says it has to fit. You don't need a drasha if it's there in front of you. So that's problem number one. And number two is shelo yehei davar hakodem lemechnasayim me'al b'saro nafka. And he says that's learned from somewhere else. It's not learned from these psukim at all. And therefore, says Reish Lakish, I have no way to give a uniqueness as to why the Torah only shared the ketones and the michnasayim, and therefore, says Reish Lakish, it must therefore be that we're only talking about him wearing two of the garments, and therefore it must not be an avoda because it's not four begadim, and that's how Reish Lakish gets out of it. And in fact, the Gemara takes it a step further. Nema ketanoi. Maybe this isn't only a machlokas between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan as to whether the machlokas between the Tanakh and Rabbi Lazar by Hotzas Hadeshen applies even to Harama. Maybe this is also machlokas in the Tanaim. How so? Because the Brisa says as follows: Nema ketanoi al bisaro. What does it mean when the Torah says al bisaro? If it says al bisaro to put the clothes on your body, matal malomar yilbash. Yeah, we know where to put the clothes. We know if you don't wear the clothes, you're not dressed. So why you have to say yilbash? We know al bisaro, cover your flesh. Yilbash, it's an extra word. It says the Gemara, according to the Tanakh, Rabbi Yehuda, lahavi mitznefes ve'avnei laharama div Rabbi Yehuda. Here we see an explicit shita of Rabbi Yehuda that the word of yilbash comes to add the other two begadim that are not included in the pasuk. This aligns perfectly with the shita Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan wanted to say that really all four begadim were implied. Rabbi Yehuda says it explicitly, lahavi mitznefes ve'avnei, to add to the ketones and to the michnasayim. Now he has all four begadim. So pashat by the harama, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that it's going to be considered an avoda mamish. All four begadim are here. However, Rabbi Dosa Amar the Rabbos Big Day Kohen Gadol B'Yom Kippurim Sheksherim LeKohen Hedjov. No, he doesn't say that the words al bisaro, that the word yilbash comes to teach me that there are two more begadim added for harama sadeshen. No, those words are coming to teach me a total secondary side point that the clothes of a Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur can be used by a Kohen Hedjov. But that doesn't solve our problem that Reish Lakish presented, which is that we seem to only have two begadim explicated in the psukim. So it seems to be that these two Tanaim have the same machlokas of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. That maybe Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda, the Tanakh in this Mishnah holds like Rabbi Yochanan because he says that the word yilbash comes to include the extra two begadim that were missing in the psukim. Perfect. All four begadim, it must be that it's an actual avoda. Masha Enkein, the shita of Reb Dosa says the word of yilbash doesn't come to teach me to add those two begadim in. It comes to teach me a total side din, and therefore we're left with only two begadim with nothing unique as to why they were presented, and maybe Reish Lakish has what to rely upon. Says the Gemara, still within the Brayta, Amar Rebbe, no, shtei tshuvos badavar. There's two things that I don't agree about in regard to the Shita Rebbe Dosa. We spoke about the sugya already, that the avnei that's spoken about here is not the same avnei of the Kohen Hedon and Kohen Gadol, not the same one. And the second problem is the ode. How can you say, Rebbe Dosa, that the pasuk of Yilbash comes to teach me that the clothes that a Kohen Gadol wears can be worn by a hedjot? Asks the Gemara 3 lines from the bottom. The ode, the Gadam shenishtamishet ben kedusha chamur tishtamish ben kedusha kala. You did the avodah lifnai v'lifnim with these clothes. How can you then give it to a Kohen Hedjot? That's a Yerida. That's a Yerida in Kedusha Malin Mekodesh Vein Moridin. You can't give these clothes to him, Rebbe Dosa. So Rebbe pushes back strongly on Rebbe Dosa. Elamat Hamulomar Yilbash. What then, according to Rebbe, is Yilbash? Because Yilbash can't be what Rebbe Dosa said for the two reasons just presented. Says the Gemara in the name of Rebbe, Tav of Chavdal Amar Aleph, LeRabos Es Hashchakim, to include clothes that are worn down. Those are allowed to still be, they're halachically still valid for the avodah. And a brisa, a closing brisa, it's a 6-line brisa. We've learned it a couple of times already. It says at the top, we learned it on Daf Yud Beis, and we're going to learn it again on Daf Samech. And we learned it more than once. Nevertheless, v'hinicham sham. What does the pasuk mean when it says v'hinicham sham, that you should place them there? The full pasuk reads Uva Aaron el ohel moed ufashatas bigdei habad asher lavash bevo ohel hakodesh. He takes off the linen garment that he was wearing, and the pasuk concludes v'hinicham sham, and he puts them there. Why does the pasuk need to tell us exactly what he does with them? V'hinicham sham. So the Tanna Kama writes, the fact that it says v'hinicham sham indicates that the Kohen should take these midobad, these linen clothing, and they need to be buried. However, what does Rabbi Dosa hold? Rabbi Dosa Omer Ru'uyin Hein LeKohen Hedyot. Same thing that we saw in the previous brisa, that he holds that once it's worn by the Kohen Gadol, you can still wear it. Rabbi didn't agree with it. Rabbi Dosa felt it was reasonable. Matam Alomar v'hinicham sham. Why does it say that? Shelo yishtamesh bahen Yom Kippurim acher. Oh, no, it can be used by another Kohen. So if you're saying it can be used, what does v'hinicham sham indicate? It doesn't indicate that it can be used. It seems to be a line that it can't be used. We have to set them on the side only to indicate that they cannot be worn on another Yom Kippur. So then, now we're done with all the Tanaic stuff. Then asks the Gemara, my lab, doesn't it seem like this is the case, the machlokas Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Dosa is the same as the machlokas Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. My lab, demar savar avoda, the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, who says the word yilbash includes the mitznefes and the avnei to total out to 4 begadim, seemingly implies it's an avoda. Umar savar lav avoda he. And really, the second shita Rabbi Dosa holds that it's not, because the word yilbash doesn't come to add the mitznefes and the avnei to the 4 begadim, and now we're only left with 2, and that's the same machlokas Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish has. Says the Gemara, 6 lines down, 5 lines down, chavdal and lo. No, your comparison is not correct. Dekulei alma avodahi. Really, this machlokas Rav Yehuda and Rav Dosa is not about whether or not the harama sadeshin is an avoda. Everyone agrees it's an avoda. The hacha b'haka miflagei Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Dosa are arguing about the following: Mar savar tzricha krala rabuye, umar savar lo tzricha krala rabuye. One says we need a pasuk to teach us the rule, and the other one says we don't need the pasuk to teach us the rule. How does this play out? According to Rabbi Yehuda, who said the word yilbash teaches me about the mitznefes and the avnei, he says we needed the Torah to add in yilbash to tell me that I needed to include the other 2 begadim and that it's actually an avoda. Masha'en Kain Rabbi Dosa would say, Afal Pi, that the word Yilbash is used to teach me something secondary. It doesn't make a difference. I don't need the Torah to say Yilbash. We never wear 2 of the begadim, and therefore, by definition, we should be wearing 4. So the Gemara wanted to say the machlokas of Yochanan and Reish Lakish was a machlokas Tanaim, and the Gemara concludes that is not the case. And Mir Hashem will pick up tomorrow with Chavdal and Amar Aleph. I know, unfortunately, today it was the levaya for the father of Gerald Koss. He should have an aliyah, and he and his family should have a tremendous amount of comfort in what is, of course, a difficult time. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
Did you look up the